Central Pacific, late 1944. Rain has just rinsed the coral dust from a prisoner of war enclosure cut into scrub and crushed shell. Under a canvas fly, a row of portable field showers hisses to life, boiler flames ticking in the wind. Steam drifts sideways, catching in wire knots and helmet brims. A medical department corporal checks the temperature gauge, hot, not scalding, then lifts a hand. The line inches forward. Rifles stacked at the gatehouse. Tags counted. Clothing bundled and numbered for the quartermaster laundry crew waiting beside a trailer load of canvas bags. A Japanese prisoner steps beneath the nozzle and braces. The first sheet of hot water hits like a shock, chasing salt, insect powder, and weeks of grime off skin in a brown spiral. Soap passes down the line, 2 pumps at a time. Lice combs clink into a pan. At the far end, a medic dusts armfolds and collars with delousing powder and waves the man toward a warming tent. By afternoon, the laundry unit brings the bundles back warm and folded. Numbers match to tags, piles stacked by block and rank. A sergeant reads the roster aloud. Clean cloth meets clean skin. For a moment, the enclosure is quiet except for steam, canvas, and the soft thump of returned uniforms. Pacific war camps did not invent order on the day the hoses hissed. They applied rules written long before any nozzle turned. By late 1943, as U.S. forces drove up the Solomon Marianas Philippine arcs, prisoner handling had a choreography: search, segregate, register, medical inspection, delouse, bathe, clothe, and assign to a compound under posted regulations. The aim was blunt: prevent disease, stabilize morale, and protect both guards and captives while intelligence and labor cadres were sorted. U.S. Army Medical Department officers and Quartermaster Field Services stood at the center of that process. Because the one thing that can turn a secure enclosure into a disaster faster than rumor is an outbreak seeded by lice, filth, and damp clothes. The Army's preventive medicine histories make that priority plain. Hygiene and delousing were operational tasks, not afterthoughts. Law backed the routine. The governing instrument during the Second World War was the 1929 Geneva Convention, relative to the treatment of prisoners of war. Its Article 13 required the detaining power to take all necessary hygienic measures to keep camps clean and to prevent epidemics, and to provide conveniences maintained in a state of cleanliness, with provision, as far as possible, for baths and shower baths, plus sufficient water for bodily cleanliness. Monthly medical inspections were mandated to watch for contagious disease and overall sanitation. Those clauses did not prescribe the exact hardware, but they left no doubt about the duty that hardware would fulfill at scale. The hardware existed, on wheels. Between wars, the Quartermaster Corps had grown a family of mobile bath and laundry capabilities. In wartime, these deployed as quartermaster laundry companies and fumigation and bath, F&B companies, whose job was to generate hot water, soap, and clean textiles for thousands on a schedule. A wartime quartermaster field manual described the laundry company as a mobile unit capable of weekly service on the order of tens of thousands of men, with equipment arranged in a standard layout so trucks, boilers, washers, wringers, and drying racks could be sited and running within hours of arrival. The same doctrine adapted served prisoner enclosures: collect garments, tag and tally by roster, wash, boil, rinse, dry, fold, and return by number. Bath lines were paired to that cycle. An F&B detachment set canvas screens, raised shower risers, lit burners, and established temperature checks so hot did not become harm. The point was not comfort but control of louse-borne disease. AI, lesson learned in earlier wars and reinforced by World War II's insecticide revolution. Delousing powders, famously DDT by mid-war, and combs sat at the exit end of the line. Medical orderlies checked body folds and collars and dusted as needed. Manuals and later field hygiene texts recorded the logic that practitioners already knew. Break the louse cycle, and you break the epidemic potential that can cripple a camp. None of this worked unless throughput worked. A boiler must keep pace with the queue. A laundry line must match intake. Tags must never drift from bundles. Quartermaster after-action narratives are dry: gallons per hour, pounds per shift, fuel consumption curves. But their dryness is the discipline that keeps tempers down and infections out. In practice, that looked like intake tables for clothing, left to right, record book, tag number, canvas sack, a one-way shower lane with soap issue and timing, an exit check where delousing powder and a cursory exam caught the outliers. a warming tent for men who had not felt hot water in weeks, then a controlled issue point where warm, folded uniforms came back to their owners by block, bunk, or roster number. If a tag was lost, a retag table sat between laundry and issue so the error did not ripple into rumor. The surprise recorded in guard diaries and oral histories, the shock at hot water or at garments returned still warm and folded, rests on a hard, unromantic foundation, fuel, boilers, detergent, trained crews, and a schedule that did not slip when weather turned or intake spiked after a battle. These were not ad hoc kindnesses. They were the visible edge of a system designed to satisfy international law, protect the garrison, and keep interrogation and labor assignments from being derailed by skin disease and lice. Even accounts from other theaters underline how widespread and standardized the fumigation and bath mission had become by 1944 or 45, with segregated F&B units servicing entire armies on the move. Culture had to be managed inside the procedure. Interpreters explained modesty screens and timing. Medical officers adjusted flow for older prisoners who risked syncope after sudden heat. But the rules did not bend on sequence: register, bathe, delouse, clothe. The goal was not benevolence. It was legible hygiene, seen, timed, and repeatable, so captives understood that tomorrow would look like today. That predictability was as much a security tool as a sanitary one, and it answered the convention's requirement in the only way a crowded enclosure can, with visible routine. ICRC IHL databases by late 1944, the pairing of shower lanes and laundry cycles was an expected feature of large prisoner enclosures across the Pacific lines of communication. When weather turned or transports delivered a surge, commanders flexed by adding boiler trucks or extending hours, but the workflow stayed the same. That is why a quiet scene, the hiss of water, the chalked timing board, a corporal's hand on a thermometer, became one of the strongest signals inside the wire that order had replaced improvisation. The next layer of context sits above the hoses and folding benches. How theater commands interpreted Geneva obligations across different islands and rear areas. How quartermaster laundry doctrine traveled from combat divisions to PW enclosures and then to long-term camps, and why the simple act of returning clean, folded uniforms mattered as much to public health and discipline as any barbed wire diagram could. Across the Pacific and into the rear, the shape of hygiene was constant even as scenery changed. Island enclosures were improvised grids scraped from coral or cane. Rear area and continental camps were surveyor straight with bathhouses plumbed to permanent boilers. The obligations behind both were the same and explicit. The 1929 Geneva Convention required detaining powers to take all necessary hygienic measures to keep camps clean and to prevent epidemics, and, as far as possible, to furnish baths and shower baths with sufficient water and soap for personal cleanliness. Monthly medical inspections were mandated to watch for contagious disease and overall sanitation. Those lines, short, legal, unromantic, explain why hot water, soap, and delousing were treated as daily duties, not favors wherever prisoners were held. In practice, the convention's words rode on quartermaster and medical department hardware. The Quartermaster Corps fielded laundry companies and fumigation and bath, F&B units, whose mission was to generate hot water, cleanse textiles, and break the louse cycle at scale. A wartime quartermaster field manual described the laundry company as a mobile unit, able to provide weekly service to tens of thousands. Famously, about 36,000 men per week in the 1942 Quartermaster Field Manual, by deploying boilers, washers, wringers, drying racks, and folding benches to a standard layout that trucks could reproduce quickly. The same doctrine, adapted, served PW enclosures. Garments collected and tagged by roster. Washed, boiled, rinsed, dried, then folded and returned by number. The bath half of the system moved with equal discipline. F&B detachments raised canvas screens, set risers, lit burners, and enforced temperature checks so hot never became harm. At the exit stood delousing stations, combs, dusting, and inspection, because the surest way to prevent a camp emergency is to break the vector. U.S. preventive medicine texts recorded the wartime transition in insect control. Early war powders and pyrethrins gave way to DDT as the standard louse powder by late war, a practice codified in Army hygiene manuals and later summarized in field sanitation handbooks. The through line was simple: Kill lice, kill outbreaks, and do it visibly so the line trusts the routine. Theater commands applied the same grammar under different constraints. On forward islands, showers were portable. Fuel and water dictated cadence. Weather could turn chalkboards to paste. In rear areas and in the United States, fixed bathhouses and semi-mobile laundry plants delivered higher throughput and steadier temperatures. But the workflow stayed familiar to any guard or prisoner who had passed through an island enclosure. Register, bathe, delouse, clothe, with a re-tag table to keep a lost ticket from becoming rumor. Quartermaster histories emphasized that bath and laundry were not frills. They were field services essential to health and discipline, and they extended, where required, to prisoners and civilians under U.S. control. Medical officers measured success in ledgers, not in sentiment. The AMED campaign histories from the Pacific stress sanitation, vector control, and the logistics of keeping human beings intact under tropical disease pressure. They also document the clinical logic of hot water, soap, and clean cloth. Skin disease drops, lice vanish, clinic queues shorten, and the risk of epidemic, typhus most feared, collapses. Hygiene, in other words, protected the garrison as surely as the captive. Inside the wire, laundry doctrine translated to small mercies that mattered. Numbered tagging kept garments with owners and reduced loss claims, a discipline as important to order as a fence line. Folding benches turned warm, dry bundles into visible proof that the system worked. Inspection tours recorded bath capacity and laundry throughput, alongside rations and medical isolations. When intake surged after a battle or a transport arrival, commanders flexed hours and boilers before they flexed punishments because throughput, gallons per hour, pounds per shift, was the lever that kept tempers and infections down. Quartermaster volumes from the war years record bath and laundry as routine line items precisely because the routine held even under stress. Culture sat inside procedure, not above it. Interpreters explained modesty screens and cadence. Barbers and shave chairs trimmed hair to reduce lice reservoirs. Medical staff watched the elderly and undernourished for syncope after sudden heat. Where theater policy allowed, captives exchanged filthy uniforms for temporary coveralls while their clothing ran through the plant. Returns were issued by block and roster, often still warm. The shock that guard diaries describe. Men startled by hot water after weeks in the field. Faces going still when folded uniforms came back to their hands. Was the human surface of a legal and logistical machine designed to meet Geneva's hygiene articles exactly. By 1944-45, the system had a bureaucracy's memory. Inspection reports carried bath counts, delousing totals, and laundry loss rates. Command memoranda directed additional boiler trucks or longer hours when weather or intake demanded. Medical summaries tied drops in skin and louse-borne disease directly to the cadence of showers and clean textiles. The language is dry on the page. The effect was palpable in the yard. A camp where steam rose at posted hours and bundles returned warm and folded was a camp whose security and health were both under control. From this scaffold, the law's lines, the quartermaster's plants, the medical department's ledgers, grow the angles that define the story you're telling. Human reactions at the nozzle and the issue table, sanitary and clinical gains, logistical math that keeps the line honest, leadership choices that made hygiene routine, and the moral legal frame that kept care legible rather than sentimental. The next section turns to those angles, beginning with the human shock of hot water and warm cloth made regular. The first surprise was heat. Men who had rinsed in canteens, puddles, and salt creeks felt hot water fall in a continuous sheet. Skin flinched. Shoulders rose. Breath caught at the throat as steam pressed close and powdered insecticide ran in brown rivulets off collarbones and ribs. Modesty screens and canvas lanes gave a little privacy, but the ritual remained public enough to feel strange. A medic's palm steadied a shoulder with the lightest touch a guard can give. Soap passed down the line 2 pumps at a time. The sound of fingernails finally clean was loud to ears that had lived too long under grit. Caution followed. Prisoners looked for the trick, for the extra shove, for the cold shock at the end. It did not come. Instead came a delousing dust at the exit, a towel, and a wavering moment in a warming tent where heat peeled the tension off faces one layer at a time. At the issue racks, the second surprise waited, bundles warm and folded. Ties through the sleeves, numbers visible. Men reached in as if the cloth might crumble. It did not. Fabric that held shape reminded hands what discipline feels like when it is not a blow. Relief arrived quietly. It showed up in posture, in the way fingers stopped hiding food under cuffs, in the way a man stood straighter when his garment, tagged to his number, returned to his reach. The enclosure did not soften. Wire still ran in clean lines. Guards still counted. But the hour had predictability, and predictability in captivity is the first mercy most men will believe. A camp fails in the small things first. Lice at seams, scabies under cuffs, impetigo at the jawline where a shave never truly takes. The bath and laundry cycle aimed at those joints. Hot water opened pores. Soap and friction stripped oil and dirt. Dusting powder at the exit broke the parasite circuit where a comb alone could not. Medics looked for the obvious fever, cough, wound infection, and for the ordinary that ruins a barracks. Athlete's foot, ringworm, heat rash that seeds secondary infections in a humid tent. They logged cases, counted powders, adjusted flow when the aged swayed after sudden heat. Laundry mattered as much as water. Boil or hot wash cycles killed lice and nits clinging to seams. Proper drying did the rest. Folding tables produced more than neat piles. They produced uniform dryness. A check that mildew hadn't found a corner and that damp cloth wouldn't carry the camp's next problem back into bunks. Clean clothing reduced scratching, and less scratching meant fewer broken skin barriers and fewer infections that can jump from nuisance to infirmary. Health metrics responded fast. Clinic queues shortened the day after a full cycle. Skin complaints fell in clusters. Louse counts dropped to single digits on random checks when delousing dust was available at scale. Medical officers noted another change they trusted even more than numbers: smell. A compound with regular showers and dry returns stopped smelling like ferment and started smelling like soap and canvas. That told a seasoned NCO what the ledger would confirm in a week. Outbreaks retreat when heat, water, and folding benches run on time. There were limits. Water and fuel set the cadence. Weather pushed chalk off boards. But the principle held across islands and rear areas. Break the vector, break the risk. The hygiene hour protected captives. It protected guards. It protected the entire logistics line that had to keep both standing. A shower line is a math problem disguised as steam. Boilers must keep ahead of the queue. Lanes must clear at a pace that keeps water hot but never scalding. Soap issue must match heads in line so the last man gets the same 2 pumps as the first. Dilucing dust must be measured so the pan is never empty when the line is longest. Every failure in that chain writes its own rumor inside of an hour. Quartermasters solved it with layout and cadence. Intake left to right. Strip, bundle, tag, canvas bag to the laundry truck. A clerk wrote numbers twice, on the tag and on the roster, so a lost slip could be reconstructed at a retag table without turning a mistake into grievance. The shower lane ran one way. A timing board near the risers set expectations: 1 minute under, soap, rinse, step off. At the exit, a medic dusted collars and cuffs and scanned for trouble. A warming tent caught the men the boiler always makes lightheaded. The laundry line was its own choreography. Sort by tag. Wash, boil. Rinse twice. Dry to standard, not to hope. Fold with sleeves tied through so the bundle could be stacked and carried without unrolling. Stack by block or bunk, not by guess. The final act, return warm and folded, was not flourish. It was a quality control check as plain as a gauge. If the cloth reached the hand warm, the plant had done its job. If it reached it folded, the tag and roster had held under load. Fuel curves and water tables forced choices. Commanders flexed by adding a boiler truck or by extending hours, not by cutting the sequence. The sequence is what kept order from becoming argument. Interpreters made the schedule audible. MPs protected the angles where pushing starts. Barbers just inside the exit cut hair short enough to reduce lice reservoirs without turning the hour into humiliation. Every station saved minutes for the next. Throughput had a second mission: discipline. When bundles returned correctly and on time, loss claims fell. When loss claims fell, tempers fell with them. When tempers fell, guards stopped burning time on small fires and returned to perimeter watch and transport duties. A camp that could bathe and clothe its population on a schedule was a camp that could count on tomorrow looking like today. And that certainty is the cheapest security tool any commander will ever own. These 3 angles, human, sanitary, logistical, sit closest to the steam and the folding bench. The next set steps outward to the officers' rules, cultures, and ethics that kept the hour from turning into theater and made it routine instead. Hot water does not appear because someone is kind. It appears because orders say it will. In prisoner of war administration, leadership translated international law and medical doctrine into repeatable instructions that any camp staff could execute under pressure. Commandants posted shower hours like formation times. Quartermaster officers scheduled boiler firing cycles, water draws, and soap issue by block. Medical officers wrote inspection rounds that touched every lane: the risers, the delousing table, the barber chairs, the warming tent. MPs received a diagram with angles to hold, so queues stayed orderly without turning into confrontations. The strongest policy choice was legibility, schedules in 2 languages, temperature limits chalked over the risers, a retag table stationed between laundry return and issue to prevent a lost ticket from becoming grievance. Lost claims were logged, not debated at the rack. When intake surged after a battle or transport, the commandant flexed hours or added a boiler unit before he touched anything else. Throughput was health, and health was security. Inspection tours recorded bath capacity, delousing totals, and laundry loss rate alongside rations and medical isolations. The dry language meant the system could be audited, up the chain across to neighboring enclosures, and forward to transport echelons where the same choreography would be needed tomorrow. Leadership also shared custody. Interpreters stood at the entrance reading rules aloud. Barbers were placed just inside the exit to close the louse cycle. Quartermaster clerks kept the tag ledger while assistants matched warm, folded bundles to roster numbers. The command climate emphasized procedure over personality. When a guard or prisoner appealed for a shortcut, the answer pointed back to the board. In that way, the hour avoided theater. It became policy, and policy is what keeps steam and cloth arriving on time when weather, rumor, and fatigue try to pull the day apart. Hygiene runs through culture as much as plumbing. Many Japanese prisoners came from months in the field where ablution was improvised and modesty guarded by terrain, not canvas. The bath line introduced screens, set cadence, and asked men to share a ritual in public. Interpreters did the invisible labor here, explaining sequence and limits: 1 minute under, soap, rinse, step off. No shock cold finish, delousing dust at the exit, warming tent beyond. The first pass through the line often showed hesitation, a hand held halfway to soap, a flinch at the riser. By the second pass, cadence and modesty found a truce in routine. Barber chairs sat just past the delousing table for a reason deeper than neatness. Short hair reduced louse reservoirs and eased medical inspection of scalp and neck. But haircutting can humiliate if it looks like penalty. The station was therefore folded into the hour's normal flow, not staged at the gate. Interpreters framed it as health, not punishment. Barbers worked with unhurried economy. Mirrors were absent on purpose. Shave stations did similar work at the jawline, where lice and skin infections take opportunistic hold. The effect, small in the moment, compounded over weeks into fewer clinic cases and a quieter barracks. Clothing returns carried their own cultural charge. Uniforms warm and folded signaled more than cleanliness. They signaled respect for property and person within the discipline of captivity. Bundles handed back by number rather than by nickname or whim told men that tomorrow's hour would look like today's. When substitutes were necessary, temporary coveralls, while uniforms cycled, the posted board named the change in plain words, and the interpreter read them. A compound accepts new habits when the rules tell the truth and the hands at the counter keep their gestures small. The 1929 Geneva Convention did not dictate the smell of soap and canvas at noon, but it required the conditions that produce it: clean camps, baths and shower baths as far as possible, monthly medical inspections, and all measures necessary to prevent epidemics. In a crowded enclosure, those promises become credible only when they are visible. Leadership answered with posted schedules, temperature checks, delousing at the exit, and a ledger that could stand in front of any inspector. The hour was therefore not benevolence. It was law, translated into equipment, fuel, and time. There was a second ethic at work: distance as protection. Hygiene delivered too close to the guard's goodwill could look like favoritism, too far from the ledger like neglect. The bath and laundry cycle kept care at arm's length. Counters, rosters, tags, and benches that ensured the same bowl of soap, the same minute under the riser, the same powder at the exit, regardless of a guard's mood or a prisoner's story. It defended captives from arbitrary treatment and guards from accusations of fraternization. Cameras, where allowed at all, were kept to designated positions, steam canvas racks, never faces and hands at the moment of issue. Mercy, made procedural, becomes defensible. The legal frame also explains the hour's tone. No speeches, no forced gratitude, no surprises at the nozzle. A system born to prevent typhus and scabies proved itself in the clinic ledger. Skin complaints down, lice counts near zero, infirmary light, and in the disciplinary sheet, which calmed when loss claims and rumor shrank. The best moral argument the camp could make was also the most practical one. Tomorrow is posted. When captives know the schedule is real, they stop pushing at the corners where fights start. Hot water and warm cloth, returned by number, thus served the two sides of the convention at once, humanity and order. These outer angles, leadership that made care repeatable, culture handled with respect inside routine, and a legal ethic that kept mercy auditable, complete the frame. What remains is to watch the system under pressure, a day when weather, surge, and rumor arrive together, and the camp must prove that steam, dusting powder, and folding benches can hold a crowd and a conscience at the same time. Okinawa PW enclosure, June 1945, the day the line could have broken 5:35 hours. Night heat still hangs in the brush when the first truck noses through the outer gate. It tows a quartermaster bath unit, boiler, pump, hose reel, paint dulled by salt. Behind it, a second truck carries canvas bags already stenciled for laundry and two hard-worn folding benches. The camp has been running at capacity for a week. Overnight, a transport detail offloaded more than 100 new Japanese prisoners from forward holding. Sunburned, insect-bitten, some with field uniforms and rags. The medical officer's note from 2200 last night was blunt. Delousing must be complete within 24 hours. Lice counts rising on cuffs and collars. Risk if line stalls, it's not rhetoric. A louse-borne outbreak in a crowded wire can undo a month of quiet. 4-5. The fumigation and bath detachment swings the boiler trailer into position on the scraped pad beside the shower lane. Canvas screens go up first, modesty and windbreak in one. An MP sergeant walks the lane, checking for widened approaches. Today's queue will be longer and longer queues vibrate. The engineer corporal cracks the boiler hatch, checks the fuel remaining from yesterday and curses under his breath. Not empty, but not generous. He signals for the fuel detail. The fuel detail is late. 600. The camp commandant arrives with the medical department captain and the Japanese language interpreter. The commandant has already made the leadership choice that will decide the day. The cycle will not be shortened. No one will be turned away at lukewarm. Hygiene is doctrine, and doctrine is what protects the guard force. He points to the schedule board and has the interpreter rewrite the serving hours in large dark characters. Aero 700, 1100 bath, 1300, 1600 laundry returns, delousing every exit. In smaller English script he adds, fuel priority to boiler 1. Orders, not speeches. 6:20. Intake begins. New prisoners are led in under escort, registered and sent to the strip and bundle tables. Clothing is pulled, shaken for contraband, and tagged in duplicate. One tag to the garment bundle, one to the man's roster card. A quartermaster clerk lays finished bags in a row for the laundry truck. He flags any torn garments for repair. Camp policy is to return what came in, repaired if possible, substituted if not, but always folded. This is where many camps fail. A lost or unreturned item becomes story. Story becomes grievance. Grievance becomes disorder. Today's flow cannot afford that escalation. The boiler finally growls to full heat. The corporal at the risers tests the water, steady, hot, safe. He lifts his hand. The line moves. First prisoner under. A man in his 30s, hair matted with sweat and delousing powder from a forward spray line. He hesitates. Forward units usually ran cold. The interpreter, standing where he can be seen, says the single sentence that has smoothed 1,000 Pacific shower lines. Hot water. 1 minute. Soap rinse, step off. The man leans in. Water sheets over his back. Mud, powder, salt run away in curls. He exhales. Behind him, a second man takes his place almost eagerly. For 2, a rain squall hits. Canvas snaps. Chalk on the board begins to blur. Squalls are the enemy of order. They make men huddle, shorten tempers, and threaten the drying racks. The commandant doesn't change the plan. He orders 2 men to hold the canvas tight at the windward corner, and has the interpreter restate the rules with his back to the rain so the words stay clear. No pushing. No re-entry, delousing at exit clothing this afternoon. The MP sergeant shifts his men a pace inward to keep the queue from seeking the boiler's heat. 5705. The laundry truck departs with the first full load, bundles tagged, sacks tied. Inside the truck, the wash crew already knows today's priority. Fast turn on undergarments and shirts, slightly longer on trousers where seams harbor lice. Wash boil where fabric permits, double rinse, dry to standard. The NCO in charge posts a folding schedule on the inside of the truck's tailgate. Return to camp 1300. If that hour slips, the entire afternoon issue collapses. 7:30. A medical orderly at the exit table logs what he sees. Small abrasions, mild fungal infections, 2 men who wobble from the heat. He sends them to the warming tent, not to the compound. Never release a man straight from hot water back into wind. He dusts collars and armpits with delousing powder. A small waste of powder today will save gallons of fuel tomorrow by preventing reinfestation. The captain notes the rate on his pad. Dusting holding 95%, and nods to the commandant. The line is doing its real job, blocking outbreak Daro 815. The first point of failure appears. A tag is missing from a bundle of trousers. The prisoner, wet and wrapped in a loner coverall, tenses. Lost clothing in captivity has a long shadow. The quartermaster clerk doesn't improvise. He walks the bundle to the retag table, checks the duplicate roster entry, and writes a new tag in front of the prisoner and the interpreter. The MP at the angle watches, expression flat, but the message is clear. The system, not a mood, will fix this. Around them, the line keeps moving. 9:30. Boiler pressure dips as the fuel detail finally arrives. The corporal throttles the flow just enough to keep water hot without starving the next hour. The commandant glances at his watch and at the intake gate. Still more prisoners from last night's transport filing in. Smaller now. Older, some trembling. He makes the second key decision of the day. Extend the morning window by 30 minutes and push laundry issue back by 15. It will hurt the afternoon, but it will keep delousing on the right side of the 24-hour warning. 100. The last men in the initial surge clear the showers. Delousing powder is low but adequate. The nurse's note from the warming tent is the best the commandant could have hoped for. No syncope. Hydration adequate. That means clinic load this afternoon will be light and guards won't have to be pulled to carry men. The shower lane is hosed down, canvas reset, powder pans refilled from reserve tins. 55. Right on the tailgate schedule, the laundry truck returns. Steam spills when the doors open. The smell is a mix of hot cotton, detergent, and canvas. Clean, institutional, reassuring. Folding benches swing down. Bundles emerge warm and folded, sleeves tied, tags out. The quartermaster NCO lays them in rows by compound, tent, and roster number. An MP establishes a narrow issue lane. No crowding, no hands over the table. The interpreter stands by with the list in one morning. Under weather, fuel delay, and intake surge, the camp has done what doctrine promised. Every new prisoner bathed, deloused and queued for the return of his clothing. The afternoon will test the other half of the promise. Can the issue be as precise as the shower? And that will decide whether the day becomes memory or complaint. 100 hours. The issue lane opens. Steam still rides the bundles. The quartermaster NCO plants his palm on the first stack and calls the cadence the compound has learned to trust. Number, name, tent. The interpreter repeats each in Japanese, clear enough to carry to the back. An MP has chalked a narrow no-hands line at the table's edge. It keeps order without a shout. A clerk checks tags against the roster sheet, touches the paper with a pencil point, and nods. The first prisoner receives a uniform warm and folded. His fingers pause on the crease as if cloth could hold a temperature from another life. 7. A familiar stress arrives with the second stack. A prisoner hears his number, steps early, and instinctively reaches past the line. The MP does not bark. He taps the chalk once with the baton, then points to the interpreter. The interpreter reads the posted instruction, issue by roster, hands down until called. The man lets his hands fall. The bundle comes to him on the next beat. Tiny corrections prevent large ones. So, The first rumor of the hour appears at the back. Missing bundles. The quartermaster clerk counters it by performing redundancy where everyone can see. He holds a tag pair up, bundle tag and roster stub, and mates them, then lays both flat on the table edge before the bundle leaves his hand. The matching gesture repeats with the next 5 issues. The rumor loses oxygen and sags back into the wire hum. 22. A real test lands. An entire microlot, 6 shirts, arrived in one sack with their tags smashed to pulp by a rain leak in the laundry truck. The NCO does not hide it. He walks the sack to the retag table in sight of the lane, calls the numbers off the damp roster copies, and writes new tags as the interpreter reads each name and tent aloud. He then adds a short sentence for the crowd that keeps the process from looking like invention. Retag under roster authority. The phrase means the tags are not favors. They are paperwork repaired by the book. POWs. Heat presses down. The clinic tent moves closer to the issue lane. Men who had stood in hot water this morning begin to sway in the sun while they wait for cloth. The nurse instructs water in small sips with salt, before and after receipt. The interpreter repeats the instruction. An MP at the side keeps the approach clear so no one trips a man who has forgotten how to stand, still after weeks of motion. 3. A small storm of loss claims starts when 3 men insist the laundered shirts are not theirs. The line holds because the clerk never argues at the rack. He writes each claim on a duplicate form, sets the shirts aside with their new claim tags, and moves to the next number. The retag table will resolve the puzzle at the end of the hour against the duplicate roster and the laundry plant's wash list. Disputes deferred without insult are disputes already half settled. Fate 6. The boiler crew, free of the shower line until evening, checks the racks for dryness. Nothing returns damp. Damp cloth breeds mildew and sends men back to the clinic with rashes that look like negligence. The corporal slides a hand inside one folded shirt and keeps it, their account longer than necessary, warm, dry. He nods once to the NCO and moves. On 1405, a second rumor spikes. Last of the soap on born. From a man who saw an empty case beside the trash. The quartermaster NCO lifts the lid on a fresh crate and lets the interpreter read the stencil to the crowd. Soap, 48 cans. He relatches the lid and sets the crate in the shadow of the table so the next empty box doesn't start another story. Rumor like mildew thrives in damp and direct light. Give it shade, and it dies. 18. A cameraman appears at the rope with a civilian pass issued by a rear area public affairs office. He raises the lens toward the moment of hand-to-hand issue. The MP sergeant is already moving. He points to the designated position marked on a stake across the track. Racks, steam, laundry truck tailgate, no faces at the instant of exchange. The interpreter explains the same rule that governed the field kitchens. Policy, not spectacle. The lens drops to the approved angle. The photograph that will result will be dull and correct, steam canvas bundles. Dullness keeps dignity intact. 4:30. The head of the line now moves with a rhythm you can set a watch by. The clerk has developed a 4-beat. Call, match tags, lay both tags flat, release bundle. The interpreter rides the beat without rushing it. Repetition, visible and audible, turns suspicion into expectation. A man who expects his turn is a man who does not push. 4:2. The retag table begins to pay off. 2 of the 3 disputed shirts are matched to their owners through a pencil indentation on the damp roster copy. A number pressed hard enough to leave a ghost. The 3rd claim survives. The clerk marks it for the evening inspection and a temporary issue of a loaner. The claimant signs the slip with 2 witnesses and a guard. An honest paper trail is worth more than a fast apology. The commandant makes a last, small adjustment that saves 10 minutes. He has the interpreter read the dismissal cadence in pairs of tenths instead of singles. The MPs open the exit gate wider by 1 pace. Men depart in groups that look like order rather than a trickle that invites backflow. The clinic reports no collapses. The nurse scratches a quick line that tells the story better than any paragraph. Hydration adequate. Sips observed. 15:03. The last stack shrinks to 5 bundles. The NCO keeps the exact cadence for those 5. Many programs fail in the final minutes when fatigue bends standards. Warm cloth lands on the last palms as if the hour had just begun. The interpreter reads the final number without softening. The bundle goes out. The chalk at the table edge stays bright. 510. Accounting begins. The clerk totals issue versus roster, claims opened, retags executed, loss rate 0 today, and breakage 2 buttons. The medical officer totals dusting rate, clinic light, fainting none. The MP sergeant writes 3 words that matter more than any sermon. Q behaved, angles held. The commandant signs beneath a line the quartermaster has underlined twice. Throughput achieved. 15:30. The lane folds in the order it opened. Folding benches swing up. The truck doors close on empty sacks and a final smell of hot cotton. The nurse caps the powder tins and carries the ledger to the infirmary. The interpreter wipes the schedule board clean except for tomorrow's hours, which she rewrites larger than before. The men in the compound sit on their bunks in clean cloth that still remembers heat. The turning point is not a speech or a handshake. It is a day when steam, dusting powder, tags, and folding benches held against weather, rumor, and numbers. That day will teach the camp to trust its own board. What happens next will not be dramatic. It will be durable. The aftermath written in ledgers, inspections, and the simple quiet of a clinic that no longer expects an outbreak at dawn. The first proof that the hygiene cycle had done its work did not arrive as applause. It arrived as numbers. The medical ledger for the week closed with a curve that ran in the right direction. Louse counts on random scalp and seam checks dropped to near 0. Impetigo cases fell by half. Scabies entries thinned to a handful marked under treatment. The clinic nurse underlined the line she trusted more than any speech. Fainting none. Hydration adequate. For the guard detail, that meant no stretcher runs from the issue lane, no diversion of MPs to carry men who had gone lightheaded from heat or sun. For the commandant, it meant the hour that spent fuel returned time, the rarest commodity in any crowded enclosure. In the quartermaster books, the change looked like discipline made visible. Loss claims, the spark that lights more arguments than any wire infraction, collapsed once tagging, retag, and issue by roster proved they could survive a rainstorm and a surge intake. The plant's return log noted dry to standard on all lots. Mildew complaints vanished. The 2-button breakage the NCO had circled at the end of the big day never became a story because it had a paper trail and a plan for repair. Folding benches, mundane wood under canvas, became the symbol of a promise kept. Bundles warm and folded meant the system worked from boiler to rack. The MP incident sheet grew spare. Where a week earlier the margins had carried small frictions. Hands over the table, crowd swell at the chalk blur. Impatience near the boiler's heat. The last 3 entries read like a drill sergeant's wish list. Q behaved. Angles held. Dismissal cadence effective. The sergeant rotated new men through the lane not for punishment but for training. He had them study the 4-beat at the table, call, match tags, lay both tags flat, release bundle. Because that beat taught something many posts never learn. Order can be audible. Once a man hears order, he can help keep it. The interpreter's notebook filled with smaller victories. Phrases that had been hard the first week, retag under roster authority, issue by roster, hands down until called, tomorrow posted, no longer required explanation. They had cadence now. She requested a second chalkboard so the tomorrow line could stand alone. Bigger, legible from the back. When the board said 800, 1100 bath and 1300, 1600 returns, the compound believed it. Belief did the work that bodyguards often have to do with arms and shoulders. Barber and shave chairs, folded into the hour to reduce louse reservoirs, left their fingerprint in the clinic summaries. Fewer inflamed follicles, fewer infected nicks, faster inspection of scalps and necks. The medical officer, whose prose seldom strayed from the ledger's tone, added 1 human line. Compound odor improved, soap, canvas. An old field surgeon's way of saying the place had turned from ferment to clean heat. Anyone who has run a crowded barracks knows how rare that transformation is without constant shouting. Here the schedule did most of the shouting, and it did it in chalk. The commandant's report up the chain carried the phrases headquarters likes to see. Throughput achieved, delousing cycle maintained, loss rate 0, clinic light. He requested 1 small addition that read like a luxury but wasn't. A second boiler trailer held in reserve. The case he made was not sentiment. It was risk management. If fuel slipped or weather turned, A redundant heat source would protect the one routine that was now doing more for security than any wire repair: the predictable hour. Outside the wire, the effect traveled. Work details, forestry, road repair, camp maintenance, showed fewer morning delays caused by skin complaints and lightheadedness. Interrogation teams noted that men processed through the bath and laundry cycle presented clean, rested, and calmer, which meant interviews started from attention, not grievance. Mess lines steadied because men in clean cloth stand differently. They do not hover at the ladle or tuck food into cuffs when they trust the next hour will look like the last. Not every day ran as smoothly as the turning point afternoon. Weather still tried to erase chalk. Fuel still threatened to wobble the gauge. An occasional camera still tested the rope. Each time the remedies were the same and now quick. Rewrite the board large, shade the soap crates, point the lens to the designated position, keep the re-tag table visible so error never posed as favoritism. The compound learned what any good ship's crew learns. When the procedure is legible, crisis just becomes another page to follow. By week's end, the staff stopped calling the hour a program. It was routine now. The best signal of that status was mundane. The interpreter erased the day's schedule and rewrote tomorrow without looking to the commandant for permission. A small act. A large meaning. The camp had taught itself to trust its own board. The ledger can only take us so far. The wider consequences belong to the second part of the aftermath. The way weeks of posted hours turn into doctrine, how reports migrate across theaters, and how a habit born beside a boiler becomes a standard other camps borrow when their own chalkboards blur. By the third week, the hygiene hour had a memory that outlived the men who set it up. It appeared first in paper. The commandant's standing orders added a new annex, bath and laundry SOP that diagrammed the lane, listed riser counts, fixed temperature limits, and specified the 4-beat issue cadence: call, match tags, lay both tags flat, release bundle. A margin note set the rule that saved more arguments than any guard ever could. Claims resolved at retag table only. The annex traveled with the rotation. New guards learned steam and cloth the way they learned wire and watch. It appeared next in maintenance. Boiler crew set a schedule. Tube brushing every other day. Burner jets checked at dusk. Gaskets kept in a marked chest that no one rated for other needs. A fuel curve pinned to the inside of the trailer let the corporal predict run time by head count. The quarter-ton driver learned to stage jerry cans under tarp where sun and rumor could not see them. The water point adopted a fill window that landed before the first prisoner reached the riser, so the line never watched a truck do the thing they feared most: leave when thirst was highest. Predictability consumed fewer nerves than any sermon. The medical section refined its ledger. Delousing dust was rationed by exit table, not by day, so the pan never went empty at the worst moment. Random louse counts returned to single digits and then to zeros. Skin complaints fell to cases that came in ones and twos rather than waves. The captain added a column that no manual had required but every clinic understands: smell. The compound now read soap canvas at noon instead of ferment. He wrote the phrase with the same cool hand that wrote temperatures and pulse rates, because he knew that smell is a proxy for danger in crowded places. The quartermaster reduced waste by confession rather than punishment. If a tag was smudged or a sack slipped in rain, the plant wrote it down and walked it to the retag table in view of the lane. The visibility made honesty cheaper than denial. Loss rate stayed at 0 for 12 days, rose to 1 on a wet Thursday and returned to 0 on Friday after the plant chief stapled tag strings to the sack lips for that week's hauls. Fixes that could be seen became lessons, not accusations. Interpretation matured from translation into cadence. The chalkboard gained a second panel devoted only to tomorrow. The numbers were circled bold enough to read from the back row. The interpreter moved her position. 3 steps forward at the moment rumor usually started and learned to repeat key lines and half phrases. Issue by roster, hands down until called. So the reply ran on top of the fear rather than behind it. The most common requests no longer needed her. Prisoners had learned the board's grammar and could point to it themselves. Across the wire, work details and interrogation teams felt the downstream effects. Men in clean cloth reported on time without the scratch-driven restlessness that makes orderlies and guards hard. Interviewers noted that eyes met theirs sooner and strayed less to cuffs and collars. The first 20 minutes turned to questions rather than comfort. Mess lines steadied because men who trust schedules do not hover at the ladle or try to carry meals in sleeves. The camp's disciplinary sheet thinned by a margin that no one could prove belonged entirely to showers and laundry, but every veteran of crowded places knew the signs. The hygiene routine also proved exportable. A smaller enclosure upriver borrowed the annex in the lane diagram after a bad week of lice. They duplicated the retag table, the no-hands line, and the designated photo position to keep dignity intact under inspection. 2 weeks later, their clinic notes read like the main camp's clinic light. Dusting rate 95%, loss rate 0, and their mayoral liaison stopped writing in alarmed adjectives. The method had done what good methods do, travel without translation. Audits from higher headquarters found what they liked to certify. Bath capacity met, delousing maintained, laundry returns by roster, claims reconciled, no outbreaks. The inspector, an old quartermaster officer who had spent his youth fighting mildew in tent cities, asked one favor that sounded like vanity and turned out to be prudence: laminate the lane diagram. Paper tears in damp. Doctrine shouldn't. A week later, the diagram hung from a lanyard on the issue table, wipeable and resistant to weather, a small shield against forgetfulness. There were still days the board had to be rewritten big, still afternoons when a camera drifted too close and was pointed back to dull angles with the phrase that had saved so many scenes: policy, not spectacle. Still nights when fuel arrived thin, and the corporal eked the gauge by throttling flow without letting temperature fall below safe. But the camp no longer measured itself by crises avoided. It measured itself by habits kept. The men inside the wire began to carry their uniforms to the rack a little differently. Creases aligned, sleeves not stuffed, and the guards began to speak less at the hour because the ladle and ledge rhythm of steam and tags did the speaking. By month's end, the annex had a final sentence that made the ethic plain. This hour prevents epidemics and arguments. Maintain it before all comforts. In war, priorities written that simply are rare and precious. The bath and laundry routine, once a shock, had become law made warm, visible, repeatable, and therefore trusted. Only one thing remains to close the record: the quiet meaning of hot water and folded cloth in captivity, and what they say about power, prudence, and restraint. Hot water is not compassion. It is discipline made visible. In a crowded wire, the most humane acts are the most prosaic: posted hours, a temperature limit, a retag table where error is repaired in public, folding benches that turn damp cloth into order you can touch. None of that asks for applause. All of it asks for precision. When a camp keeps those small promises, the air changes. The smell tilts from ferment to soap and canvas. Voices shorten. Rumor runs out of corners. The ledger that began as defense against accusation becomes proof that tomorrow can be predicted. It is tempting to call the shock of hot showers and warm, folded uniforms a gesture of mercy. In fact, it is the Geneva line: epidemics prevented, cleanliness maintained, translated into steam, dusting powder, and time. Law, when it enters a place like this, does not announce itself with speeches. It arrives as a chalked schedule that survives rain, as a bundle that returns to the right hands without argument, as a clinic note that reads light on a morning that might have been heavy. The human effect: men standing straighter, hands leaving cuffs, eyes meeting orders instead of looking past them, comes after the mechanics have done their work. There is power in that humility. A command that makes care auditable protects everyone: the guard from suspicion, the captive from whim, the camp from the spiral that begins at a rack and ends at a fence. When a routine can be taught, borrowed, and verified, when it can travel to another enclosure and land with the same rhythm, it stops being an incident. It becomes culture. The hour you've watched is therefore larger than its tools. It is a lesson in how force behaves when it chooses restraint. The wire stays. The counts continue. But inside that frame, the chosen rigor, clean water, clean cloth, kept time, does a different kind of work. It proves that order need not be loud to be strong, and that the most durable authority is the kind that can be checked against a board, a ledger, and the warmth still held in a fold. The benches are stacked. The boiler ticks as it cools. Tomorrow's hours are already written large enough to read from the back row. In camps where days once blurred, men now measure time by steam, and by the quiet knowledge that the system will keep its promise again. Subscribe for more true stories that remind us of what it means to be human. even in the darkest of times.